Let's get into it right now. Because what happened outside that hospital was not just a photo opportunity. It was a message. And if you know how to read between the lines, that message tells you everything about where Ohtani's season is headed from this point forward. What was your first reaction when those images came out, Ohtani walking out of the hospital in that unusual attire with heavy bandaging visible? Honestly, the first thing I noticed wasn't the bandaging. It was his face. Ohtani is one of the most composed athletes in the world. He smiles through pressure that would break most players. But in those images coming out of the hospital, his expression was different. Controlled, yes, but there was something behind the eyes. A seriousness that told you this wasn't a minor procedure. This wasn't fluid drainage and go home and rest for a few days. Something bigger was being managed here. And then you look at the attire. He came out in loose-fitting clothing that was clearly chosen for a reason. When a player of Ohtani's physical condition is wearing something that deliberately avoids pressure on a specific part of the body, that's not a fashion choice. That's a medical instruction. The heavy bandaging around his left knee was visible even through the clothing. Medical staff were flanking him on both sides. Mamiko was right there. This was a carefully coordinated exit, and the fact that they used a private vehicle rather than a standard team vehicle tells you that the Dodgers wanted to control every single detail of that moment. From a practical standpoint, what does a 12-page medical record even mean in this context? Most injury reports we see are a paragraph. Maybe two. What goes into 12 pages? That's exactly the right question, and it's the one the media hasn't really focused on. When a medical record runs to 12 pages for what is being officially described as knee irritation and fluid removal, something doesn't add up. A standard knee procedure for a professional athlete, even a detailed one, doesn't generate 12 pages of documentation unless there are multiple conditions being tracked, multiple observations being recorded across multiple sessions, or the findings during the procedure were more complex than what was publicly announced. Think about what goes into a document like that. There's the pre-procedure assessment. There's imaging analysis, MRI findings, ultrasound, possibly X-rays. There are notes on the exact volume of fluid removed, the appearance of that fluid, what it indicates about the underlying joint condition. There are post-procedure observations. There are rehabilitation protocols. And then there are physician notes that discuss long-term prognosis. When all of that adds up to 12 pages, it suggests this knee situation has been developing over a longer period than the public was told. It wasn't something that appeared last week. This has likely been building since at least mid-June when he first left a game early. Right. And we know that the knee issue affects his pitching more than his hitting. What does that mean for how the Dodgers manage him going into the second half? This is where it gets really interesting from a baseball strategy perspective. Ohtani himself has said the knee bothers him more on the mound than at the plate. And when you think about the mechanics of why that is, it makes complete sense. His left knee is his landing leg. Every single pitch he throws ends with his full body weight crashing down onto that left knee. Over the course of a 6-inning start, that's well over 100 landings. And that's not counting bullpen sessions, warm-up throws, and side sessions between starts. As a hitter, the knee barely factors in. You can see it in his numbers. Since the knee issue became known, his offensive production hasn't dropped at all. He's been hitting over .290 with a slugging percentage well above .500. He hit a home run on the very day he went in for the procedure. That kind of performance from a player who just had fluid drained from his knee is remarkable. But it also creates a very complicated situation for the Dodgers, because the version of Ohtani that's available right now is 100% functional as a hitter and significantly limited as a pitcher. From the perspective of the opposing team, how do you approach Ohtani differently knowing his knee is affecting his pitching mechanics? This is a fascinating angle that I don't think gets enough attention. When a pitcher is dealing with a landing leg issue, the first thing it affects is his ability to drive off the mound with consistency. That means pitch location becomes less reliable. The bite on his sweeper, which is normally one of the most difficult pitches in baseball to time, becomes slightly more predictable because his release point isn't perfectly repeatable when he's compensating for knee discomfort. Before the injury became public, batters were already starting to lay off the sweeper more. Now you have an explanation. They weren't suddenly smarter at the plate. They were picking up on mechanical tells that Ohtani himself may not have been fully aware of. His fastball was still 98 to 100 miles per hour, that part never changed, but the combination of a fastball and a perfectly timed sweeper is what makes him virtually unhittable. Take even 5% of the sharpness off that sweeper and suddenly batters have a slightly longer window to identify and react. And that slight window is the difference between a 0.74 ERA and a 1.79 ERA. That's not a failure. That's still historically elite pitching. But it explains the gradual upward trend in ERA that people started noticing from June onward. What I find most impressive is that even while managing this injury, he pitched 6 innings, gave up minimal runs, and continued to generate ground balls rather than relying purely on strikeouts. That speaks to how evolved he is as a pitcher now. Absolutely. And this connects to something bigger about Ohtani's development this season. Earlier in his career, and even at the start of this season, Ohtani was the kind of pitcher who could afford to overpower hitters on sheer stuff alone. Triple-digit fastball, sweeper that disappears, strikeouts in bunches. That was his formula. But what we've seen in the last several weeks is a pitcher who is learning to win games differently. He's inducing ground balls. He's working counts. He's getting outs in ways that preserve his pitch count and protect his body. From the outside, some people look at a lower strikeout total and think he's declining. But that interpretation misses what's actually happening. Ohtani is doing something far more difficult than striking batters out. He's managing a 162-game season, a Cy Young race, an MVP race, and a significant knee injury, all at the same time, and still preventing runs at an elite level. That's not decline. That's maturity. And looking at the scene outside the hospital, Mamiko at his side, medical staff surrounding him, the private vehicle, the heavy bandaging, none of that was accidental. The Dodgers and the Ohtani camp managed that exit deliberately. They wanted to show that he is moving under his own power. They wanted to show that he is calm. They did not want images of a player being wheeled out or visibly struggling. Every element of that departure was a message to opponents, to voters, and to the public. The message was, Ohtani is recovering. Ohtani is going home. And Ohtani will be back. What do you think is the realistic timeline here, and does this injury ultimately affect his standing in the Cy Young and MVP races? The Cy Young race is still his to lose. His ERA, even with the gradual increase from the knee issue, remains among the best in the National League. The innings pitched gap is a real concern. Sanchez and others in the race are accumulating innings at a faster pace due to more frequent appearances. But if Ohtani returns from this break healthy, if the knee procedure genuinely provides lasting relief, and if he can string together 6 or 7 clean starts in the second half, the voters will remember the totality of what he's done this season. The MVP situation is even clearer. 30 out of 35 first-place votes at the midpoint of the season. His offensive numbers are MVP level even without a single pitch. The knee doesn't change any of that. What that 12-page medical record really represents isn't a reason for alarm. It's a document of how deeply and how carefully Shohei Ohtani is being managed. And if there's one thing we've learned about Ohtani over the last several years, it's this: when the full force of his preparation and medical support comes together around a specific goal, he tends to achieve it. The hospital doors have closed behind him. The private vehicle has pulled away. Mamiko is at his side. And the second half of the season is waiting. Ohtani will be ready.